Alright gamers, we are closing in on the last few days before the Edge of Fate launches, and with all the news that came out about the exotics being featured on day 1, I thought now would be the best time to give my honest opinions on what I think will be the 9 best exotics once the Edge of Fate launches. Starting us off with the first exotic I'd get, we have is Worm God's Caress. This exotic actually caught me by surprise, only because I never thought I would end up seeing its return since its old days of being able to bake bosses with a hammer. But the exotic perk for this grants an increasing damage stack upon a melee kill, starting at 1 stack with a maximum of 5 stacks for 10 seconds, with a maximum increased melee damage sitting at 400% damage increase with the new melee changes coming in the Edge of Fate. Now, do yourself a favor and just imagine mixing that with a max melee stat of 200, which will grant an additional 30% damage increase. In my opinion, this exotic might even have some day 1 raid potential if you end up focusing for this exotic, would heavily focus into both the melee stat and the weapon stat if possible. For the second exotic, we are getting Wishful Ignorance. This exotic is getting a fairly hefty change, but I'm going to be completely honest, I don't think I've ever used this exotic once. But the exotic perk does read, it grants an additional Frenzy Blade ability charge. Frenzy Blade or Fletchet Storm hits grants a stack of Wish Dragon's Talons for a maximum of 3 stacks. Each stack does an increasing amount of melee damage, with a maximum being 200 for Frenzy Blade and 200 for Fletchet Storm. On top of that, Banner of War pulses grant 5% Frenzy Blade ability energy and additional 5% for each ally within 10 meters. So for any of you guys that enjoy 1-2 punch builds, this definitely might be up your alley. If you are looking to focus into this, would definitely grab the stats of both melee and health or melee and weapon. Now for the third and final exotic for the Titans, we have the Path of Burning Steps. Now personally, I love this exotic, but I'll love it even more once the changes come within the Edge of Fate. This exotic, I'm not gonna lie to you, might become a viable option within DPS phases going into the new raid. The new changes now read increased solar weapon damage and solar ignition damage based on the number of stacks of Roaring Flames that you have. The max stacks of Roaring Flames can grant you 20% bonus solar weapon damage and 15% bonus ignition damage. But that's not even the best part about this exotic. You can now stack surge mods with it. It also reduces the duration of suspend, slow, and freeze effects applied to you. If you want to try to grab this for yourself, would definitely recommend you focus into both the super and the weapon stat just to get some added benefits to your weapon damage. Now, moving on over to my hunters, here's the one that I'd recommend for you. Starting us off for the hunters, we have Gifted Conviction. This exotic during Heresy was one of my favorites to use because of its ability to grant massive amounts of damage resistance in a short amount of time. The exotic perk reads, activating Ascension or Tempest Strike throws bouncing explosives at nearby targets that jolt and damage them. Jolting nearby targets grants you an increasing damage resistance buff with a max stack granting 50% damage resistance. But now with the changes coming to Ascension and the abilities it has to activate the perks such as Reaper, Powerful Attraction, and Dynamo, it will be a perfect exotic to bring along with you going into the Legendary campaign. If you are interested in picking this up, would definitely focus into the class stat and the melee stat if possible. Now for the second hunter exotic, we have Star Eater Scales. This exotic is among some of the best exotics for hunter DPS. Overall, it is a very solid exotic to farm for. This exotic reads, you gain additional super energy from orbs of power you pick up by 2%, but decreases to 0.5% super energy if you are on Marksman Golden Gun. While your super is full, picking up an orb of power overcharges your super, increasing stacks upwards to 6 times. Casting your super while at 1 stack grants you 18.2% increased super damage, 2 stacks grants you 36.4%, 3 stacks grants you 54.6%, 4 stacks grants you 59.7%, 5 stacks grants you 64.8%, and then 6 stacks consumes all stacks and grants a 70% increased super damage for 14 seconds. Would highly advise you go after this because of the amount of DPS that you can do just with this exotic alone. If you are interested in going for this, the stats that I'd recommend you focus on are super and weapon. Now for the third and final exotic for the hunters, we have Mask of Fealty. Now I can't lie to you when I tell you that this exotic is just fun to use. It's not game breaking, it's not insane, it's just enjoyable to say the least. The exotic reads, Withering Blade hits and bounces, create a small stasis crystal, and refunds a portion of melee energy. Using Withering Blades to shatter crystals or frozen targets releases a spread of Withering Blade. Again, nothing too game breaking, but it is fun to say the least, especially if you do like using Withering Blade as one of your melees. If you are interested in getting this exotic, your main focus is going to want to focus into the melee stat and the class stat. Now, onto the final class, we have Warlocks. Now, for the first exotic for the Warlocks, we have Starfire Protocol. This exotic was once the DPS meta for Warlocks for the longest time, with its ability to spam grenades and have insane amounts of DPS. But ever since the Season of the Deep change, we saw it become a former shell of itself. But now that changes are coming to this exotic within the Edge of Fate, we might see the return of Warlocks being able to out DPS a Titan. The changes to this exotic allows for the exotic perk to engage upon radiant damage and increases the fusion grenade energy gain from dealing damage from 2.5% to 5%. The unfortunate part though is that they are decreasing the amount of fusion grenade energy gain from 20% to 15% upon defeating enemies, which, in my opinion, keeps things a little bit more tame this time around, but it's still a bummer when something gets nerfed nonetheless. If you do want to grab this, would definitely recommend you focus into the grenade stat and the class stat. For the second exotic, we have Fallen Sunstar. High ability regen is something we always enjoy in any sort of build. The power fantasy of being able to throw grenades made out of fire or electricity is always something Warlocks have always strived for. But with the Fallen Sunstar exotic, this will essentially make it so you can constantly have high uptimes on any ability that you are currently using. The exotic perk reads, Ionic traces you create move faster and grant you additional ability energy. Nearby allies also gain ability energy when you collect an Ionic trace. This exotic can grant 25% grenade energy, 25% melee energy, and 30% class ability energy. Ionic trace pickups grant 10% grenade, melee, and class ability energy to allies within 15 meters. This is one of my favorite exotics to run on Warlock whenever I do end up playing as a Warlock. If you are looking to focus into this exotic, would definitely recommend you grab the stats for grenade and for melee. Now for the final exotic for the Warlocks, we have Rhymecoat Raymond's. Its ability to freeze large groups of enemies is without a doubt unmatched. Your Bleak Watcher turrets are enhanced with extended range and surrounded by stasis crystals and a storm. While standing in the storm, you are granted icicles over time. Icicles activate when you fire your weapons, applying slow to targets they hit. Again, this is more along the lines of if you need anything for ad clear, definitely a very solid choice nonetheless. If you are looking to focus into this, would definitely focus into the stats of grenade and for health. Now, these are just my opinions on what I think would be the best going into the Edge of Fate, but let me know down in the comments what you guys think. If you also enjoyed this type of video, I will be making another one fairly soon, talking about some of the exotic class items that I'd actually recommend you pick up, so stay tuned for that one. If you guys can, do me a favor and drop a like and a follow. It helps me out a ton, and we are slowly but surely growing to 500 subs, and that is a goal that I want to reach before the end of 2025. Not to mention, if you are also interested in the shorter versions of these types of videos, would definitely recommend you go follow me over on TikTok. We post almost daily, and once the Edge of Fate launches, you're not going to want to miss my content, especially with new stuff dropping almost every single day. Thank you guys for staying until the end of the video. My name is Johnson, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.